When you realize this, everything changes. For millennia, the human experience was anchored in the visceral, gritty reality of the physical world, a world where the archetype of the child was forged in the fire of direct experience, unsupervised play, and the inevitable friction of the earth. This was the era of the play-based childhood, a primordial rite of passage where the young of our species learned the ancient grammar of social interaction through the scraping of knees, the negotiation of rules on a sun-drenched playground, and the mastery of the physical environment. In this sacred period of development, the adolescent brain functioned as an alchemical furnace, an athanor, where the raw lead of childhood impulsivity was slowly transmuted into the golden sovereignty of adulthood through the constant, necessary heat of risk and exploration. The community, acting as a collective guardian, understood that the soul requires a certain degree of anti-fragility, like a bone that must be stressed to become dense, or an immune system that must encounter pathogens to learn the art of defense. The human spirit required the challenges of the physical commons to find its true north. But then, in a blink of cosmic time, between the years of 2010 and 2015, the sky darkened with a different kind of cloud, the digital cloud, and the great rewiring of the human soul began in earnest. The migration was silent, swift, and absolute. The child was removed from the dirt and the trees, the local parks and the neighborhood streets, and was instead thrust into a high-speed, algorithmic laboratory of glass and silicon. This transition from a play-based existence to a phone-based existence represents a tectonic shift in the very architecture of consciousness, a movement from the embodied reality of the tribe to the fragmented void of the virtual Colosseum. The digital stepmother, in the form of the smartphone, offered a siren song of total connectivity, but what it delivered was a profound and systemic isolation that has left an entire generation wandering in a psychic wilderness, disconnected from the rhythms of their own biology and the restorative silence of their own interiority. The tragedy of this great rewiring lies in a fundamental misunderstanding of the psychology of resilience. For decades, the collective psyche of the modern world has been gripped by a pervasive safetyism, an overprotective ideology that views the physical world as a minefield of existential threats. Parents, acting out of a distorted sense of guardianship, began to overshelter the bodies of their children, effectively caging them within the home to protect them from the vanishingly small risks of the outside world. Yet, while the physical body was being treated as a fragile porcelain doll, the soul was being left entirely unprotected in the most dangerous digital wilderness ever conceived. We have underprotected our children in the digital world, where predatory algorithms and anonymous judgments are designed to harvest their attention and liquidate their self-esteem, while overprotecting them in the physical world where they desperately need the friction of reality to grow. This is the paradox of the modern guardian. We are terrified of a stranger in the park but will hand our child a portal to the abyss and close the bedroom door. The adolescent brain, during its most sensitive period of neuroplasticity, is now being fed a constant stream of synthetic social stimuli that bypasses the natural regulatory systems developed over millions of years. The result is not a stronger child, but a psychic hemophiliac, someone who lacks the internal clotting factor of resilience and who views the slightest social friction as a catastrophic trauma. The alchemical negretto, that dark and necessary stage of breakdown that precedes true growth, is now being avoided at all costs in the physical world, only to be experienced as a permanent state of anxiety within the digital screen. This migration of the youthful spirit has introduced four foundational harms that act as the horsemen of the digital apocalypse for the anxious generation. The first is social deprivation, the loss of the embodied social life that serves as the primary crucible for the development of empathy and nuance. In the physical commons, social interaction is synchronous and multisensory. It involves the language without words, the dilation of a pupil, the shift in a tone of voice, the subtle mirroring of the nervous system. In the virtual void, this has been replaced by the flatness of the text and the curated mask of the image. The youth are no longer living together, they are merely coexisting in a state of synchronous isolation. Their relational muscles atrophying in a world where conflict resolution is as simple as a block button and forgiveness is a forgotten art. The second harm is sleep deprivation, the theft of the sacred night. The blue light of the device is a biological lie, a siren glow that tells the brain it is forever noon, preventing the release of melatonin and the necessary descent into the unconscious where the integration of the day's experience occurs. Without the dream time, the spirit remains frayed and fragmented, unable to process the shadow material of life, leading to a state of chronic cognitive fog and emotional instability. The third is attention fragmentation, the breaking of the vessel of focus. The grand work of any human being requires the continuous fire of concentration. But the smartphone is a distraction machine designed to interrupt that fire every few seconds with a notification or a buzz. The capacity for flow, for deep immersion in a task or a thought, has been incinerated, leaving a generation of scatterbrains who can only process reality in bite-sized pixels of outrage and trivia. Finally, there is the harm of addiction, the hijacking of the dopamine reward pathway by the titans of the attention economy. These modern-day tricksters have designed interfaces that exploit the most primitive vulnerabilities of the developing brain, the need for validation, the fear of missing out, and the search for novelty. The child is caught in a variable reward schedule, forever scrolling through dunes of data in search of an oasis of satisfaction that never arrives. Analyzing these harms, it becomes clear that we have committed a systemic betrayal of the youthful soul. We have permitted a massive, unconsented experiment on the most vulnerable members of our species, allowing the liquidation of their attention and the fragmentation of their self-worth for the sake of profit. The lesson we must confront is that human sovereignty is an embodied achievement. It cannot be found in the cloud or downloaded through an app. It is found in the silence between the heartbeats, in the direct gaze of a friend, and in the mastery of the physical self against the resistance of the world. We have traded the gold of real connection for the lead of digital contact, and the price is a generation of souls that are hyperconnected but interdisconnected, starving for a meaning that the algorithm can never provide. The spirit of the child is not a data point to be optimized, but a living fire to be tended. And until we reclaim the physical commons and restore the sanctuary of the night, that fire will continue to flicker in the cold, blue light of the screen. The path back to sanity begins with the realization that the digital world is a map, not the territory, and that the only treasure worth finding is the one buried in the grit of the actual world. Beneath the roots of the trees we have stopped climbing. The rewiring of the soul is deep, but the biological drive for real connection is deeper. And the first step of the alchemist is to acknowledge the leaden weight of our current reality before the transmutation can begin. We are witnessing the slow-motion collapse of the reflective self, as the observing ego is being replaced by a reactive ego that exists only as a feedback loop to the next notification. This is the dissolution of the vessel, the breaking of the psychological container that is meant to hold the developing identity. For the anxious generation, every empty moment is now a void to be filled by the screen, a refusal to sit in the silence where the true self resides. We have denied them the gift of boredom, which is the gateway to creativity and self-awareness, and replaced it with the junk food of constant stimulation. In doing so, we have stalled the engine of individuation, leaving them trapped in a perpetual adolescence, unable to cross the threshold into the responsibilities of the world because they have never been allowed to face its risks. The transition from the play-based life to the phone-based life has not only changed what children do, it has changed who they are, turning the protagonist of their own life into a spectator of 1,000 other lives, all filtered and curated to hide the very grit that makes a human being real. We must understand that the device is not just a tool they use, but an environment they inhabit, a toxic environment that is leaching the life force from their bones and replacing it with a hollow, digital mimicry of existence. The task ahead is nothing less than a spiritual reclamation, a collective decision to unplug the machine and reanimate the world, to return the child to the earth and the night to the soul. For the lead of our digital exhaustion can only be turned to gold through the heavy, honest labor of being truly, physically present with one another in the grand, terrifying beauty of the here and now. The algorithm has no soul, and it cannot love, it only knows how to count, and it is currently counting the days until we have forgotten what it means to be free. But the soul remembers, even in the deepest fog of the digital trance. The spirit of the child yearns for the sun and the dirt, for the friction that creates the spark of life. We are the guardians of that spark, and the time has come to stop the extraction of their spirit and start the restoration of their sovereignty. The great rewiring was a choice we made in the dark. And now, in the light of our current crisis, we must make the choice to rewire once again, this time, with the wisdom of the earth and the power of the heart. The journey back from the virtual void is the most important pilgrimage of our era, and it begins with a single, radical act, the turning off of the screen and the turning toward the human face that has been waiting in the shadows of the glow, ready to be seen, ready to be known, and finally, ready to be free. This is the truth that has been right in front of us, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when the pain of our isolation finally outweighs the comfort of our distraction. The generation is anxious because it is lost, and it is lost because we have taken away the landmarks of the physical world. It is time to bring them home. The gendered divergence of this digital plague manifests with a chilling, archetypal precision, carving different paths of destruction through the adolescent soul based on its inherent orientations and vulnerabilities. For the daughter, the digital coliseum has become a hall of mirrors, a psychological labyrinth where her worth is measured in the cold, liquid currency of pixels and prestige. She is the archetype of the performer, her relational soul being fragmented by the constant, public evaluation of her image. In the play-based era, her conflicts were local, embodied, and fundamentally temporary. A disagreement in the schoolyard was mediated by the physical presence of peers, by the subtle cues of facial expression, and by the inevitable necessity of moving forward together. Today, those conflicts have been digitized and amplified by an algorithm that rewards outrage and sustains the shadow of rejection. The like button is no longer a gesture of friendship, it has been transformed into a psychic brand, a marker of social hierarchy that is perpetually audited. When she is excluded from a digital group or mocked in an anonymous forum, the wound is not just social, it is ontological. It feels like a total excommunication from the tribe because, in the virtual void, there is no behind-the-scenes life where she can retreat and be whole. Every moment of her existence is now a potential post, a performance for an invisible, judgmental audience that never sleeps. This is the visual coliseum, where the feminine drive for connection has been weaponized against the self, leading to a staggering rise in internalizing disorders, anxiety, depression, and self-harm, as she tries to reconcile her flawed, human reality with the calculated, filtered perfection of the digital mirage. For the son, the tragedy is not one of performance, but of withdrawal, a slow, silent retreat into the cave of artificial mastery. He is the archetype of the Puritanis, the eternal boy, seduced by the siren song of video games and pornography that mimic the hero's journey without requiring a single ounce of the hero's struggle. The ancient drive of the masculine spirit is to conquer, to provide, and to protect. But the physical world has become so sanitized and overprotected that it no longer offers the friction required to forge a man. In the absence of real-world challenges, the son turns to the screen, where he can experience the dopamine of victory, the camaraderie of the squad, and the illusion of power without ever leaving his chair. He levels up his avatar while his real-world self remains stagnant. His animus, the active, world-shaping principle, becoming sedated by 1,000 hours of virtual conquest. This is a failure to launch of epic proportions, a psychic castration where the labor of the world is traded for the easy rewards of the simulation. He does not learn to handle the weight of responsibility because the digital mother provides him with an endless supply of ghost experiences that feel like achievement but leave him hollow. He is not fighting dragons, he is clicking on pixels. And the result is a generation of young men who are physically present but spiritually absent, their vital energy being siphoned off by the titans of the gaming industry. This divergence highlights a profound systemic failure in the way we handle the immune system of the soul. Resilience is a quality of anti-fragility, a term that describes systems that actually require stress, shock, and volatility to grow and thrive. The human spirit is fundamentally anti-fragile. It is designed to encounter the shadow, to face the nigredo of failure, and to learn through the visceral feedback of reality. By adopting a culture of safetyism in the physical world, We have effectively suppressed the development of this internal resilience. We have treated our children like fragile seedlings in a greenhouse, shielding them from every wind and every insect, only to find that when they are finally exposed to the world, they have no root system to hold them upright. This overprotection in the physical world, the banishing of unsupervised play, the removal of risky playground equipment, and the constant surveillance of the helicopter parent has acted as a psychological immunodeficiency. We have denied them the necessary micro-traumas of childhood that serve as the vaccine against the macro-anxieties of adulthood. And yet, while we were obsessing over the safety of their bodies, we permitted a wholesale extraction of their attention. We allowed a small group of engineers in Silicon Valley to redesign the synaptic pathways of an entire generation, hijacking the process of synaptic pruning that occurs during adolescence. The adolescent brain is a vessel of intense reorganization, a time when the brain decides which connections to keep and which to discard based on experience. By feeding this vessel a diet of digital noise rather than real-world friction, we are ensuring that the connections for deep focus, empathy, and emotional regulation are being pruned away, replaced by the hyperreactive circuitry of the infinite scroll, analyzing the spiritual and social commons. We see that the digital titans have not merely built tools, they have colonized the very architecture of human interaction. They have taken the third place, the street corner, the local park, the neighborhood gathering spot, and replaced it with a digital environment designed for extraction, not connection. In the physical commons, a conversation is an end in itself, it is a sacred exchange of presence. In the digital commons, every interaction is a transaction that generates data for the algorithm. The youth are being processed by a machine that views their attention as raw material to be refined and sold to the highest bidder. This commercialization of childhood represents a profound betrayal of the intergenerational contract. For millennia, the role of the elder or the guardian was to protect the sanctuary of the young, to provide a space where they could grow and play without being exploited. We have abandoned this role, handing the keys of the nursery to the most sophisticated psychological manipulators in history. The anxious generation is the first cohort to grow up in a world where their social life is owned and operated by a corporation whose primary goal is to keep them addicted. This is a psychic slavery that is often invisible because it is delivered through a device that feels like a limb. The youth are not users of the product, they are the product. And their anxiety is the exhaust of a machine that is working exactly as it was designed to work. The psychological weight of being always on cannot be overstated. In the pre-digital era, there was a boundary to the social world. When you went home, you left the judgments of the peers behind. You had a sacred privacy, a space of solitude where you could process the day and sit with your own thoughts. This solitude is the laboratory of the reflective self. It is where the soul learns to speak to itself, to form its own opinions, and to find its own center. The smartphone has abolished this solitude. The mirror of the peer group now follows the child into the bedroom, into the bathroom, and into the very depths of the night. There is no longer any off-stage. The youth are living in a permanent panopticon, a state of total visibility where the watchman is not a prison guard, but their own internalized critic. This constant state of being watched, and watching oneself, leads to a fragmentation of the psyche. They are so busy managing the persona, the public-facing mask, that they have entirely lost touch with the self that resides beneath. They are searching for their own reflection in the approval of strangers, failing to realize that the gold of their identity can only be found in the silence that the device has stolen. This is the famine of the spirit in a land of digital plenty. The lessons here lead us to the collective action problem of modern parenting. No single parent can solve this crisis alone because the social commons is a shared environment. If one parent denies their child a smartphone, that child is often socially excommunicated from a group that only interacts through the device. This is the prisoner's dilemma of the digital age. Every individual parent knows that the device is harmful, yet they feel compelled to provide it to prevent their child's isolation. We have allowed our social world to be captured by a technology that requires total participation to function. To break this cycle, we must move beyond individual solutions and toward a collective reclamation of the commons. We must rebuild the physical walls of childhood and restore the permission for unsupervised play. We must demand that the digital titans return the attention they have stolen. But more importantly, we must return to the wisdom of the tribe. We must realize that the village is not an abstract concept, but a physical necessity. The anxious generation needs more than just a digital detox, they need an initiation back into the world of matter, into the world of trees and stones, and into the world of face-to-face conflict and face-to-face love. They need to be uncaged from the virtual and reanimated in the physical. The narrative of this crisis is a call to the guardian archetype within all of us. We have been asleep at the threshold, allowing the shadow engineers to dictate the terms of human development. We must wake up and realize that the great rewiring can be reversed, but only through a radical recentering of our lives around the embodied and the local. We must teach the youth that the treasure is not in the cloud, but in the dirt. We must show them that the hero's journey requires the presence of their physical body, the risk of real-world failure, and the beauty of real-world connection. The lead of their digital exhaustion can only be turned to gold through the heavy, honest labor of being truly present with one another. The algorithm has no soul, and it cannot love, it only knows how to count, and it is currently counting the days until we have forgotten what it means to be free. But the soul remembers. Even in the deepest fog of the digital trance, the spirit of the child yearns for the sun and the dirt, for the friction that creates the spark of life. We are the guardians of that spark, and the time has come to stop the extraction of their spirit and start the restoration of their sovereignty. The journey back from the virtual void is the most important pilgrimage of our era, and it begins with a single, radical act, the turning off of the screen and the turning toward the human face that has been waiting in the shadows of the glow, ready to be seen, ready to be known, and finally, ready to be free. The generation is anxious because it is lost, and it is lost because we have taken away the landmarks of the physical world. It is time to bring them home. The restoration of the human spirit begins with the dismantling of the digital altar. A collective awakening from the technocratic trance that has held the modern family in a state of paralysis for over a decade. The final stage of this alchemical process, the rubedo, requires a sacred reclamation of the physical world, a move from the negredo of digital fragmentation into the solidity of an embodied, sovereign existence, to break the prisoner's dilemma of the smartphone era. The guardian archetype must rise from its slumber and invoke the will of the tribe to establish 4 non-negotiable norms of sanity. These norms are not merely policies, they are the boundary walls of a new sanctuary, designed to protect the sacred vessel of the developing adolescent brain from the vampiric extraction of the attention economy. The first pillar of this reclamation is the pact of the primary years, a total ban on smartphones before high school. We must recognize that the middle school years are the most sensitive period of synaptic reorganization, a time when the brain is an open crucible vulnerable to the addictive loops of the algorithm. By delaying the entry into the digital abyss, we are providing the child with a sacred buffer, allowing the internal musculature of identity to form in the warmth of the local before it is exposed to the coldness of the global. This is the alchemical fixation, where the soul is given the time to coagulate into a stable, resilient self that can eventually navigate the virtual without being consumed by it. The second pillar of the restoration is the governance of the social soul. No social media before the age of 16. We have allowed our children to enter a permanent public performance before they have even discovered their private voice. Social media is the hall of mirrors where the persona is perpetually audited and the self is perpetually liquidated. By raising the age of digital consent, we are returning to the natural order, acknowledging that the relational soul requires the synchronous friction of real-world interaction to develop the language without words, empathy, nuance, and the grace of forgiveness. The third pillar is the sanctification of the school, the transformation of the educational environment into a phone-free sanctuary. When a child enters the school gates, they must leave the global noise behind, entering a sacred time where the prefrontal cortex can emerge from its digital fog and engage in the grand work of deep learning. Without the constant vibration of the notification in the pocket, the vessel of focus can finally be repaired. We must realize that education is the anointing of the intellect, and it requires a space that is not being perpetually punctured by the titans of the algorithm. These norms are the exodus from the digital captivity, a collective movement toward a world where the human being is the subject of their own life. not the object of a corporation's data extraction, analyzing the psychology of the collective action. It becomes clear that the anxious generation cannot be saved by individual effort alone. The smartphone is a network technology that creates a social trap. If one child is unplugged while the rest of the tribe is wired, the result is social excommunication. Therefore, the solution must be archetypal and communal. We must rebuild the physical commons, the parks, the neighborhoods, and the town squares to provide a vibrational alternative to the screen. The fourth and perhaps most vital pillar is the restoration of independence. We must uncage the body and reanimate the world through unsupervised play. The free-range childhood is the alchemical laboratory where fragility is turned into strength through the tincture of risk. By allowing children to explore the world without the sentinels of safetyism, we are initiating them into the sovereignty of the self. We are teaching them that they are capable agents in a world of matter, rather than passive spectators in a world of mirrors. This is the return to the earth, where the soul of the world can finally speak to the soul of the child through the grit of reality rather than the lies of the filter. This return requires a legislative sword to cut the Gordian knot of corporate predation. We must demand that the digital titans prove their products are safe for the developing spirit before they are unleashed upon the youth. We must raise the couple aged to 16 and demand age verification that respects the threshold of adolescence. This is the guardian archetype acting at the level of the state, protecting the commons of the mind just as we protect the commons of the air and water. We must recognize that attention is a finite resource, the primary currency of the soul, and its mass extraction is a spiritual catastrophe on par with any environmental disaster. The anxious generation is the first harvest of this extraction, and their suffering is a prophetic warning to the rest of humanity. To rescue the future, we must decolonize the childhood, removing the algorithmic flag from the heart of the family. We must re-sacralize the night, re-embody the social, and regenerate the play. This is the great work of our century, to humanize the digital by prioritizing the biological. The psychological analysis of this reclamation reveals the necessity of embodiment. The virtual world is a disembodied void where the nervous system is perpetually overstimulated but undernourished. The anxious generation is starving for reality. They are searching for the numinous in the search bar, failing to realize that awe is found in the friction of the earth and the silence of the stars. We must reconnect the soul to the body through physical mastery, creative labor, and real-world adventure. We must teach the youth that the treasure is not in the cloud, but in the dirt. The alchemist does not find the stone by scrolling, he finds it by digging. We must provide the shovels. We must let the children go into the world of trees and stones, trusting that the language of the world will initiate them where the language of the code has failed. We must be the masters of the threshold, standing at the gateway of the digital abyss and pointing the way back to the sun. The anxious generation can become the resilient generation only if we have the courage to unplug the machine and reanimate the world. The great rewiring was a choice made in the darkness of ignorance. And now, in the light of the crisis, we must make the choice to remember. We must remember that we are beings of earth and spirit, not appendages of the interface. We must remember that the grand work of individuation requires privacy, solitude, and embodied connection. We must break the mirror of social comparison and restore the window of self-awareness. The lead of digital exhaustion can only be turned to gold through the heavy, honest labor of being truly, physically present. The algorithm has no soul, and it cannot love, it only knows how to count. And it is currently counting the days until we have forgotten what it means to be free. But the soul remembers. The spirit of the child is anti-fragile, and it is waiting for us to open the cage. This exodus from the screen is the sacred duty of every adult who still remembers the scent of the rain and the thrill of the unknown. We must lead the way. We must model the sovereignty we wish to see in our children. We must put down the device and look into the face of the other. We must rebuild the hearth of the home and the gathering of the neighborhood. We must honor the biology of the soul over the profits of the machine. The anxious generation is crying out for a world of substance, and we are the only ones who can deliver it. The great rewiring is not an inevitable fate, it is a technical glitch in the history of the human spirit that we have the power to correct. The future is not written in the code, it is forged in the fire of our choices. It is time to unplug the void and inhabit the all. The core message and meaning of the anxious generation is that the wholesale migration of childhood from the physical world to the digital screen has caused a cataclysmic breakdown in the natural developmental processes of the human spirit, leading to a systemic epidemic of mental illness that can only be reversed by a collective reclamation of the play-based life. It is a clarion call to restore the social and biological commons by delaying the entry into the virtual world, rebuilding the physical independence of the youth, and enforcing the sacred boundaries of the school and the night. The book intends to convey that resilience is an embodied achievement earned through real-world friction, and that the preservation of human attention and agency is the most urgent grand work of the modern era. We must protect the sanctuary of childhood from the extraction of the algorithm to ensure that the gold of human potential is not lost in the lead of digital exhaustion. We must move from the phone-based life back to the human-based life, for the sovereignty of the soul is a gift of the earth, not a product of the interface. To save the future, we must have the courage to turn off the light of the screen and return our children to the light of the sun.